I am Victoria L. Burson. This is Leadership on the Go. Leadership is not always preparedness for the unknown, but it is tapping into the unknown prepared. Greetings, 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 and greetings. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm telling you, like, tag, and share this conversation. Like, tag, and share this conversation with whomever you can like, tag, and share with. It's going down like 4 flat tires. Can I say it again? It's going down like 4 flat tires. Listen, we had 3 extraordinary, distinctive, and compelling experts and just good people to the core who will share with us tonight what it means to evolutionize greatness through emotional consciousness, or if you will, mental health. Can I say that again? We have 3 extraordinary, distinctive, compelling experts. And when I tell you they're very compelling in the ways in which they process their whole mindset around being professional therapists, around emotional consciousness. I love it. I love these 3 individuals. They're good people. They're all in ministry, and we'll talk about that integration later. And so without further ado, I just want to go ahead and start the introduction because we have a good hour and so right before us. And I don't want to waste any time. Can we do that? All right. Thank you for your permission. Let's go ahead and start introducing our people. The first up we have, yes, is, all right, we got, okay, Dr. Pay DeRosier. Now, I probably messed up her name. She probably come across because I did ask for the proper enunciation. I think I still messed it up. But Dr. Pay, I'm just going to call her Pay tonight, if you will. But she is Dr. Pay, and I'm going to read a little bit of who she is because this is not her total identity, but I want to read a little bit of who she is right now and what she does. Dr. Pay is a seasoned behavioral health therapist, licensed social worker, clinician, and an ordained minister with a doctoral degree in interfaith clinician education in pastoral counseling. Her work explores the intersections of mental health and pastoral psychotherapy. She integrates a relational psychodynamic paradigm with constructive work in theology. She engages her patients' multiple authentic selves to engage in a productive work of cognitive and spiritual integration. The premise of her work is that practical empathy and insight result in sustainable change and wholeness. She is the national counselor for the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries, in which we call TFAM. Also an associate pastor at Rivers of Living Water, New York and New Jersey. Dr. Pay has a private practice in Brooklyn Heights, New York. Come on through, Dr. Pay. Yes. Thank you so much for being present. And so if you can, just give us like 36 seconds of what I didn't say, of who you are, what are you doing, what you want the people to know.
Oh, well, you just said a whole mouthful. First of all, I'm really glad to be here with you all this evening. I do multiple things. One of the things that's dearest to my heart is that aside from my private practice, I also run 2 groups. One is Free Therapy Tuesdays on Tuesday nights, and I started it during COVID, and we've been going for 2 years strong. And the other one is Holding Space, which happens on Thursday evenings. And I've been also doing that for that long. My practice is varied, but for me, it's always about holding these 2 things in tension, mental wellness and spirituality. And they're not mutually exclusive. In fact, I think that one feeds into the other.
All right. Yes, we're going to get into that. And I know all of you feel that way. And the viewers are going to love to hear about that, especially when we do a replay. Even the viewers who cannot be here this evening with us would love to hear what you all have to say around that. Our next guest, if you will, is Dr. Jonathan Shepard. Dr. Jonathan Shepard, who hails from Baltimore, Maryland. Yes. Dr. Jonathan Shepard, MD, is an award-winning mental health professional named top doctor in the field of psychiatry. His comprehensive approach to wellness has made him a highly sought after and well-respected motivational speaker. Renowned for his caring and nurturing bedside manner, Dr. Shepard has served and provided treatment for clients in a variety of areas, including attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, mood disorders, anxiety disorders, obsessive compulsive disorders, post-traumatic stress disorders, and many more. His mission is to help all individuals obtain access to quality mental health services. A graduate of University of Illinois at Chicago Medical School and Adult Psychiatry Program, as well as Johns Hopkins University Child and Adolescent Psychiatry Fellowship. Dr. Shepard blends professionalism and compassion to create healthier communities. He is currently employed as the Chief Medical Director of Hope Health Systems, Inc., which has its headquarters in Baltimore, Maryland. Dr. Shepard serves on numerous boards and participates in several organizations that impact and shape the programs for mental well-being of persons in diverse settings and various communities. He was bestowed the honor of fellow by the American Psychiatric Association in January 2020 and distinguished fellow by the American Academy of Child Adolescent Psychiatric in July 2019 for representing excellence and his significant contributions to the field of psychiatry. Dr. Shepard was also ordained as an elder in the Church of God in Christ 2003 by the late Bishop Samuel Stephen McCarthy of the 5th Illinois jurisdiction. Come on through, Dr.
Yes.
Shepard, and let us go. Yes, yes. And tell us a little more about you. What do the viewers need to know?
Oh man, that was just something. As you were reading, I was like, man, she had to read all of that. But I am just grateful to be here. Thank you, Reverend Burson, and thank you, Dr. Pay. And I am looking forward to this conversation. What else should you know about me? I am a Black male who is an uncle, who is a friend, a son. I am just one who loves what I do. I'm passionate about this call, and I am just glad to be here. So everything that was said, I just tag on, and almost felt like a little bit of an obituary. I was like, oh Lord. But I'll tell you, I'll say this one word: I'm grateful. If it was not for God, I would not be sitting here with all that you just read.
Yes, yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Thank you for being present tonight. I really, really appreciate you for being present, Dr. Pay and Dr. Shepard. All right, let's bring on our third guest, Dr. Brian Woodford from Baltimore, Maryland. Yes, yes. Look at that distinguished stance. I wish I could stand like that. So anyway, let's go ahead and move forward. I see you. I see you. Dr. Brian K. Woodford currently serves as Director of Behavioral Health for Us Helping Us People into Living in Washington, D.C. He earned his Doctor of Arts degree in Marriage and Family Therapy from Eastern University in St. Davis, Pennsylvania. Dr. Brian's doctoral studies emphasize clinical expertise in narrative therapy, including training from Vancouver School of Narrative Therapy in Vancouver, British Columbia. While he is versed in several therapeutic modalities, the narrative therapeutic approach he utilizes targets marginalized persons as they seek to create a new and more promising personal narrative. Dr. Brian also earned a Master of Divinity degree from Lancaster Theological Seminary in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Dr. Brian has worked intentionally to integrate his theological and psychological training to help clients address both their spiritual and mental health needs. His integration of theology and psychology also lends itself to assisting queer clients with reconciling their spirituality with their sexuality. Amen. Additionally, he is certified as a transgender care professional, TCP, through the International Transgender Certification Association in Miami Shores, Florida. Dr. Bryan is a licensed professional counselor, LPC, in Washington, D.C., and is a member of the American Association of Marriage and Family Therapy, AAMFT. He is also ordained clergy and with the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries. Come on through, Dr. Bryan. Yes, yes. Tell us a little bit more about yourself than I've already said.
Hello, welcome. Thank you for the welcome. Excited to be here with y'all tonight. Looking forward to the conversation. I love the opportunity to just share good, wholesome, healthy thought with other like minded professional individuals. When you do this work as a clinician, you often work individually just with your clients. And so it's rare, once you've been in this for a little bit, it's rare that you have the opportunity to engage and kind of bounce ideas off of others who are doing this work. Sometimes you just need to do a little check-in, like, like, okay, we are all on the same page, and I think that's wonderful. And so, in terms of what I do, it is just what you said, as the others have said. The integration of psychology and theology is very important to me. Here's how I look at it: that if anyone has faith, their faith impacts the decisions that they make. And we as clinicians, if our job is to help people explore and unpack their decisions, then we will be at a disadvantage if we did not consider someone's faith when we did that unpacking. And so to be able to do that, it's a delight for me. And you can oftentimes see the reprieve and the relief that clients have when you tell them you can talk about your faith. It's okay.
Right.
Yes, yes,
I, or
yes.
they start giving that church language. Like, I understand the language. It's okay to bring it here. It's a relief to them because they're used to so many clinicians who are not equipped to handle that dialogue.
Yes, yes. Well, thank you for that. And you're so right about that. Some people will get uncomfortable with that. So thank you all for creating that space because you all do that work. And I do appreciate that. All right. So let's get down to it. All right. I'm going to ask all of you. And this is a conversation, not an interview. And so, let's just all chime in whenever we want. As it relates to your profession as a therapist or clinician, how did you get here at this place in your life right now with therapy? And so I'm going to ask a series of questions, like a 4-part number 1 question. So who are you? I mean, like, I know we named some of that, but who are you and how did you get here at this place right now? Anybody who wants to go first? Let's not all answer at one time. We're going to start with you, Pay.
Oh, okay. Um, I think that for me, it was a culmination of a lot of different things. Certainly, growing up, I think that I didn't think of psychology or therapy as something that I could do. Um, Simply because I thought it was white and old men. And I didn't see any reflection of myself in the profession. And I actually went into economics and then went into social work simply because my own career was at a crossroad. But I did social work for a while, and then I realized that I had a natural gift, and you need more than just gifting. You need training.
Yeah.
And I went and I got a master's in social work, and then continued to do work in training and curriculum writing in social work, and it sort of evolved into therapy because I worked on a doctorate. It was very strange because I went to a Jewish seminary and got a doctorate in clinical counseling and pastoral counseling, which is something that they don't usually do, but the program was really compelling. But I think that for me, the thing was that I understood social work is really hands-on. It's about problem solving. It's about crisis management. But once you do that, before the crisis, there's, there are needs and there are different things going on. And I needed to work in a medium that allowed me with a different approach. And once I started doing therapy and counseling for a while, I realized that there was such a huge spiritual need. And for a lot of people, their their spirituality, and it's not religion per se, because people have different walks and different faith walks, but that was a source of strength for them. So my training in social work has always trained me to look and to help people and be able to identify what their strengths were. So it wasn't me identifying their strengths, it was them identifying their strengths. And then I realized, oh my goodness, what a melding that would be to be able to help people and to have people help themselves in the place where they felt the most powerful.
Oh, thank you for that. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Good. So, how did I get here?
Yeah.
I have to ask myself, to be honest with you, because I knew I wanted to be a physician, but I didn't know that I wanted to be a psychiatrist. That was not the plan when I went into medical school. I was planning to become a pediatrician. So I knew I wanted to work with children, and I did a fellowship, or actually it's called an internship after my first year of medical school in child and adolescent psychiatry. I got to it because it was a free trip to Hawaii at the end of the internship.
Tell the truth.
That's why I did it. And so as I was working with the psychiatrist, I'll be honest with you, I thought most people who were in mental health needed a psychiatrist themselves. It's weird. I don't want to have nothing to do with them. And this guy, he kind of fit that particular appearance and stereotype. But it was amazing, though, as I worked with him on the west side of Chicago, was a particular project we were working on. It was dealing with safe zones and how churches were actually the center of these safe zones. And so at the time, I was working with youth ministry there in Chicago. And yeah, I started seeing patients who had sexually assaulted children. And the one that blows my mind, and which really helped me to get to where I am today, is I saw a 7-year-old boy who had been sexually assaulted. And so we were going to meet the offender. And believe it or not, the offender walked in. It was a 9-year-old boy. I would never forget that. And it's like seared in my head. And this is coming almost 20 some plus years now. And still I can remember that scene. And that's what really provoked me to say, I'm still work with children, but I need to work with children who have mental health disorders. And I had to fight through a lot of stigma within the church. My classmates called me crazy. They said, "Why would you come to medical school to become a psychiatrist?" And I tell you, to this day, I'm just going to cut right to the end of the chase. My colleagues come back to me now and said, "You know what? You made the wrong move. I'm sorry, you made the right move. We made the wrong move." And they come and literally, I see on social media almost every week now, friends are asking me different questions on how to be able to maintain their own mental health. And so that's how I got to where I am. A whole lot of other bumps in the road. We might talk about it later, but that's how I got to where I am today.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing that story too. Bryant?
And like the others, it's a very personal journey, right? I was in undergrad when I experienced what I consider my call into ministry. And along with that, it was my belief that ministry would be full time for me. But at that juncture, at that point in my life, and my understanding of ministry and my experience in church, it was like two options: full time pastor or full time traveling evangelist. And neither one of those appealed to me at that particular time for me. And I just kind of held on to that sort of vision, if you will, and allowed myself and worked really hard to be sensitive and present in each moment, in each stage of my life, and sort of what those what those moments were calling and speaking to me. And it was really when my mother passed away, and we're Mother's Day.
Uh,
Um, and my mother actually passed away in the month of May, just about a week after Mother's Day. And so it's been almost 2 decades since that time. But that was what started me in my own mental health journey. And as a person, as a clergyman at that time, and as a Black clergyman, and as a closeted clergyman,
yeah.
I went in therapy in secret. And then, because I initially went for grief counseling, and I went in secret, and then the psychiatrist that I was seeing also at that time recommended medication, and I did it in secret because
Mm.
I didn't believe that the environments of my culture and in my faith community could handle that truth that I was those truths that
Wow.
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
carrying. And it was through that own experience, that my own experience, where I really um, I wanted to provide a safe space for people who were like me, literally, who were going through it like I was. And I also believe in the other personal part of my journey is, um, I can say this now, I could not say it then, but my mom died at a relatively young age.
Yep.
And because I'm young, and she died almost 20 years ago. Then of course she was young, right? But I really, I believe that she suffered from mental illness, probably
Mm,
bipolar, that went undiagnosed and untreated.
Wow.
And I remember watching my mom go through those highs and lows through life, and I think that it ultimately led to her demise, her early demise. And I wanted to make sure I felt like at that point, part of my calling as it began to sort of develop was to be a clinician, was to provide treatment to people of color, Black folks, to people of faith, to kind of again work at all of those things that stigmatize us and prevent us from getting the mental health care that we need.
thank you so much for that. As all of you were talking, and particularly Brian, you just mentioned something that I'm going to shift a little bit.
Mm.
I feel the Spirit of God shifting me in this conversation a little bit. I was going to ask a lot of personal questions. We might get back to that, but I think you guys kind of like said a lot already about what's going on in your world and how did you get here, and we'll get to how you're moving forward and all that stuff. But I want to get straight into the conversation around. You just mentioned it. This whole stigma,
Mhm.
this whole idea around stigma, particularly with, and I'm just going to say, I'm going to name it, particularly with believers, followers of Christ, Christians. And so, why such a stigma around mental health, particularly in the Black community? I don't care who goes first. Why such a stigma? We still have the stigma, even post COVID. We still got people that won't go to therapy.
Yeah, it's shameful to say that. I'll just try to chime in and give us a couple nuggets real quick. The stigma still exists because we don't understand ourselves and we don't understand what mental health truly is.
Mm,
One of the things that I really have founded my presentations on since the pandemic has started is I have a working definition of what mental health is. It was given to us by the World Health Organization, and I just took it and I just shepherdized it, or whatever you want to say. Put it in my
I
own
love
words.
that.
So, mental health is a state of being where every individual realizes his or her own potential, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and make a contribution to his or her community. That is what the World Health Organization defines as mental health. And what I've done is made it simple: PCWC. And so when I talk to churches, I said, okay, if you don't want to talk about what mental health is, let me break it down to what I call it: PCWC. It means that you understand your potential, your ability to cope, work, and make a contribution. And when I break it down to that, then people are like, oh, I get it now. I said, well, this is what sermons are all about. If the sermons talk about your potential, how you cope, work, and the contribution. So there is no disconnection. So one of the major things that I tell people is they don't understand, and that's because of ignorance. And I'm not coming down or talking down. I said to use that word ignorance, but a lot of it just has to do with ignorance, and people don't take the time to break down what it really is. And so I think that those are some of the factors. I'll let my other fellow panelists jump in.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm glad that you mentioned, and I love your acronym. You know, I'm gonna give you credit one time. You know,
All right.
for your,
That
your
is
All right.
such a preacher thing.
right, right. I'm gonna give it to you one time. I was trying not to let that preacher come up, but listen,
Yeah.
I like how you talk about ignorance, because ignorance is not. People always also take that as stupid. It's just ignoring the truth, and we tend to ignore the truth a lot. Brian, I think you were going to say something.
Yes,
Were you?
that was right. Yeah.
Oh, of course.
Ditto to what Dr. Shepard said. And what I will add is conversation around generational trauma. And for the first thing I like to say is whenever we're talking about trauma, I never talk about trauma with any stigma associated with it. Because we have all experienced trauma in one way or another, whether it is T trauma or little t trauma, which suggests that there's a range of traumatic experiences one can have. And one of those types of trauma is our generational trauma, the trauma that have been passed down to us from our parents, our grandparents, and so great grandparents, and so on. And one of it is we're talking about people of color, Black folks, is our cultures and our experiences say that we cannot talk about our troubles. We cannot talk about this stuff publicly because it will be a detriment to our lives if we did so. And the caveat, I mean, I guess the irony in that, it is still detrimental to our lives if we don't talk about it.
Right.
Right. A strange dichotomy, but those cycles have been passed down to us, and some of it we haven't questioned. Some of us have, some of us have not, and we just have come to, what goes on in this house stays in this house, and we sweep it under the rug. We don't air out our dirty laundry, and those types of things isolate us, and isolation is a part of depression, right? It breeds depression, and so when we feel separated, isolated, can't identify with other people and other experiences, and it just kind of it becomes cyclical. It has a cyclical effect on us. And again, those things we've experienced for generations, and I think it's important to acknowledge that there were times where we couldn't do it, but we have access. We have different types of access now, and we get to take advantage of that access.
Yes.
And I tell folks all the time when they come into therapy and they have their aha moments, and their aha moment is almost like, why couldn't I come up with that on my own? And I would say, if it was that easy, people like me wouldn't have a job. As I think Dr. Pei said earlier, like there is training that is required in this, and if it was that easy, this profession would not exist. So it's okay to need some help.
Absolutely. You want to chime in, Pei?
Yeah. I just wanted to say that the thing with stigma is that it's about fear, and it focuses on our greatest fear, right? So our greatest fear when we think of mental health is mental illness, and not just mental illness, the ones that are calm, but the ones that are showy and the ones that are dramatic, right? And it rings a core of fear in all of us. Like, could that be me? Okay. And that's the fear that, that makes people distance themselves. If you think of mental health as a continuum, certainly mental illness is part of it, but so is mental health. And if you go further, so is mental wellness.
Right.
And if you think about it in that way, all of us can find a way where we could be better and healthier on that continuum. The other thing is that, so it's fear and it's secrecy. And secrecy is that if If someone knows that I am dealing with a mental health challenge, that will somehow diminish me. It won't be the face that I want to be public facing, and or I won't get the support, or people will think that they're better than me, or it answers the fact that there's something defective about me, right? So those are the kinds of things that are fear and shame based, that prevents people from getting help, that prevents people from giving support. And then the third part of it is ignorance. We don't know, and we say stuff, and we use our words without any kind of judgment, like, good judgment. Instead we oh, she bipolar, she this, she that, he's this, he's that. But the thing is that those are clinical terms that now the whole public feels like they are free to diagnose people.
Mhm.
I don't know how many times I've heard people say, oh, so and so has PTSD, and it doesn't fit the description of, of the diagnosis of what PTSD means. Because, probably what you're seeing somebody who is in the throes of their traumatic stress. It's not post yet. A certain time has to pass and they function okay and then they revert to, a slippage in how they're functioning. And then it becomes post-traumatic, right? So that means that we're using these terms and these labels, and people are afraid of the labels. They're afraid of what they mean. And there's a lot of shame in those labels. So, and we don't talk about things. So either we talk about them in hyperclinical labels that we throw around recklessly, or else we don't put clinical labels on things that are clearly very clinical, right? Oh, he's just a little down. I'm just going through something. You know how he is. Like we make all of these assumptions and all of these words that cover up behaviors that are clearly, dysfunctional. Okay. And we do that. And part of it is because we're afraid of the clinical, so either we're reckless with the clinical labels, or else we're afraid of the clinical labels and we never call it by its real name. So I think that those are the things that continue a cycle of what was the word we use? Of just stigma.
Yeah. You know what? All of you have said a whole lot that make me want to go way, just go way to the left with my questioning, because you said something, and I'm going to get to Bryant's living in secret about his mother's mental illness, because and I want to get to a whole lot. I want to get to shame basing. I want to get to self-diagnosing, and the church. We even do it from pulpits. I've done it. Let me just say, I've done it out of ignorance, right? Until I've had some clinicians who have had to come up to me in my years of ministry, 30 years of ministry, to tell me, no, you shouldn't say that. That shouldn't be a part of your sermon. And you think about these stuff because we're so used to being in, I'm going to say, traditional settings where nobody says anything. And then I get into this very, very diverse, very progressive, open, affirming settings. And then it's, I have to be more cognitive, and so, when we say things like, I remember one time saying, that's crazy. Well, they were like, Victoria, you shouldn't use the word crazy, right? How I meant it was not to offend, but it still offends, that intent versus impact. So tell me, and then this whole notion around terms. I loosely used to say, I'm having triggers. And I remember going to a conference and the clinician talked about it. If you guys are having triggers, then you need to go seek help. Stop going around loosely talking about, especially Christian folks, I'm having a trigger, or that triggered me. Then go get some help, right? Then he talked about stop saying you have OCD, because I used to say I have OCD. And I really don't even know, because, I just like things in place, and, I'm very meticulous. And I say, I just got OCD. And another clinician, and he said, you need to stop saying that, because there is medicine for that if you really do have it, right? And I said, oh, hell no, I need to really think about what I'm saying, right? And so I think I want to have conversations. We need to have conversations around that, but I want to still talk about the stigmas and the self-diagnosing, right? I know people now that are self-diagnosing their kids or themselves or their parents. Tell me the dangers of doing that. What is the dangers of particularly children, the dangers of self-diagnosing your children and not getting them properly tested or properly or even your parent, because she's older, and first thing we want to say is she must have what, dementia, or she must have Alzheimer's. So can y'all talk about that? This whole notion of Brian, I want to start with you because you kind of mentioned it. You didn't want to, the shaming around mentioning even your mother's mental illness, even though you knew something was there. And can you talk about what it is and what does it mean and what are the dangers? Or maybe there are no dangers of self-diagnosing. And so I know that's kind of like two parts. So
Well, I made my diagnosis of my mother after I went to school, became a professional. I couldn't name it then by any means. I knew what I was seeing and what I was experiencing, and she couldn't name it, and that was also at a time where we're just now starting to have broader conversations around mental health. We certainly wasn't having it that many decades ago. Um, and so there was that. The necessity of it to have that conversation again, being willing to have that conversation got me in the seat that I'm sitting today, where I get to um, help destigmatize mental illness and work one-on-one groups, whatever, families, with doing this work and caring for people through that process. The care that we provide is essential to even opening up that dialogue. When we talk about doing the work of a therapist, what the first thing that we talk about is how we build therapeutic alliance. How do we get people to trust us to do what we do?
mm,
Right? That people have already come in and they heard on Dr. Phil or Iyanla talk about this. So, they make their self-diagnosis based on some of those things that they have seen on television or social media, et cetera, et cetera. And not to say that those aren't valid conversations that they observed, but taking it on, it takes the work of a professional. Um, and so when someone comes to my office with their diagnosis, they're self-diagnosing. The first thing I ask, how did you get that? What help me understand it? What is it? I'm completely oblivious to this diagnosis that you have. So help me understand it. And by the time they try to explain it to you, you'll be like, baby, it's okay, honey. That's not what that is.
right, right,
You've had a series of bad days, and we get to talk about that. Or whatever the case is, right? But it's but part of that is creating a space where they feel safe and secure enough, and that safety does not mean it's going to be easy, because safe space means courageous space also.
Mhm.
Right? That be, that we have to be honest about what we're thinking and experiencing, because I don't take for granted people's honesty in therapy. People will come to therapy and still not tell you the full truth.
right,
And
right,
it
right,
takes
right,
truth to
right,
get this work done, right?
right.
And so, because part of that truth is stigma. Dr. Pay even mentioned it, the secrecy, right? Sometimes we hold secrets not because we just want to, because we believe that those spaces or these relationships aren't strong enough to handle my truth. And if I
Right.
think this situation or this environment or this person is too fragile to handle my truth, then I'm going to keep it. I'm going to keep it to myself.
Okay. Okay. And so, did you want to say anything to that, Dr. Shepard?
Yeah, I do. Because when you're talking about self-diagnosing, what happens is we tend to swing from one side of the pendulum to the other. Rarely is there a middle ground. People are overdiagnosing or they're underdiagnosing. And I'm glad you mentioned that for children, since that is my area that I specialize in. And that's where I see a lot of this happening, because parents will bring their children in. Um, Again, we talk about overdiagnosing. They'll come in and say, "Well, my child has an anxiety problem. They're crying too much. They're this and that." And as I spend many times, and really it's about 90% of the time, as I'm talking to the child, parents in the room, halfway through it switches to the parent. Almost,
Mm,
almost about 90%. I won't say all the time, about 90% of the time. Especially when we're talking about grief and anxiety. little Johnny, he's still grieving the loss of his grandmother. He just can't take it no more. Johnny only 5. Like, he can't take it anymore. What they're doing and what parents will do, they will transfer their grief, anxiety right onto their children. Displacement, I believe, is a term that you can use for that. And I see it all the time in child psychiatry. Or I'll see the reverse where underdiagnosed. Oh, there's nothing wrong with my child. I did a pop up to a school. Yes, I still do that. Believe it or not, I popped up at a elementary school on Friday. Hadn't done it in a long time, just to see a patient of mine. Patient wasn't even there, which told me already that something was off. And the mother just refuses to believe that something's wrong with her child. And honestly, the child may not even have the problem. It's probably the parent again. And so what I'm getting at with this whole self-diagnosing is that we must be careful for not going underdiagnosing, overdiagnosing, and we must be mindful of the amount of information that's out there on social media platforms, Google, whatever search engines. We have to be careful that we don't read up on so much and we don't diagnose ourselves. And somebody gave me a mug. I wish I had it with me, and said, "I didn't get my degree from Google," something like that. So, why you questioning my expertise? And I didn't say it just right because it flows a little bit smoother than that. But it's funny because it really is true. Because many times I spend half my initial sessions, breaking down the myths that people come in before I can even get to the root of why they're there.
I'm glad you mentioned that, breaking down the myths, because I want to go back to something Pay said earlier. And that is, if you all can just like 30 seconds or a minute or less, talk about the difference. What is the difference between mental health, mental illness, and mental wellness? Right. And so maybe I just give each one of you something to say, and if you want to add something later. So Pay, I want you to talk about the difference. And you mentioned mental health challenges. So why don't you take mental health, and Dr. Jonathan, if you can take wellness, and then Brian, if you could take illness, and talk to us about what is the difference between, is there a difference from your expertise opinion? And so just name that. So Pay, can you tell us what you mentioned mental health challenges. So what is mental health?
Okay, so mental health is a catchphrase that covers a lot of different issues, right? So some of them are issues in terms of your ability to function, so like mental, before, we say mental health, but it's also in people who are functioning at a lower mental level. And then you have stuff that, you also are lumping in people who have an emotional issue. And then you're dealing with people who may have a mood disorder and may be depressed. And then you're dealing with folks who are like an access to folks who are psychotic, which is their relationship between what's real and what's not real, right? And then when I talk about challenges, we talk about how are people managing that, right? So for me, it's very much about an equilibrium, right? Because a person may not be managing at the height of what they're capable of, but who are doing all right. Which is why, if you are, you could go through a mental health challenge and no one will know. Because if it's not something that's obvious, or if they don't catch you right at the time where you are acting out or you've had a breakdown, folks may not notice. Okay. The other thing is that people struggle with the possibility that they may be overwhelmed, right? Or they don't know what's real, So those are all kinds of very different things that have very different solutions, that have very different therapies, that have very different levels. that we're all lumping together. So a lot of, and I think that Jonathan talked about it, is about unbundling these things and separating them out and saying, okay, it's possible that you have a mood disorder and you have something else going on. You know, it's possible that you're depressed and you have anxiety. Okay, the two things could happen at the same time, right? And it could be that medication might be able to help you, talk therapy might be able to help you, but you know, it's about treatment. And treatment is not universal, it's not one size fits all. You know, you got to find the right therapist, the right doctor, and you got to find the right modality, right? And you know, I know that we were saying earlier how people have a tendency to overdiagnose or underdiagnose, but sometimes what's real too is that there's misdiagnosis. You totally didn't hit the ball anywhere. You know, professionals can miss it and drop the ball.
Absolutely.
So
That's true.
definitely, regular folk can totally miss it. You know,
Yeah.
because things can look like each other.
That's right.
You know, when we look at the DSM, you know, it could tell you that, you know, 2 and 5 make 7, you know, 1 and 6 make 7, 3 and 4 make 7, you know, like it could be a whole thing. So it's, you know, and then it's the crux, right? Because every one of us has felt the sense of being out of control or being depressed or feeling
Yes.
anxious at one point or another. So it's the degree, it's how much and for how long. That's the
That's good.
equation.
That's
You
real.
know,
That's
if
real.
your mama just died, I expect you to be sad. You are not out of context or, you know, or out of pocket because you're grieving. Okay. But if your mama died 10 years ago and it feels like just yesterday, something in you has not healed and you have not been able to move on. Okay. And you know, and the other thing too is that things like grieving and stuff, it really is a scale. Because you could find somebody, if somebody is already depressive, then anything that happens in their life is going to be like, oh, you know? And if somebody isn't, then the way that they deal with things is kind of different, you know?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's really about being really gentle with the person who comes in front of you and looking at them as an individual and not as a textbook case. I have not seen any textbook cases. I was like, either they need to train us with bigger textbooks or have much more diversity in the textbooks because no one comes that way.
Okay. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. Dr. Jonathan?
Yeah. So mental wellness, I put it there in the comments. Check your PCWC. It's really on a continuum. If you want to know what mental wellness is about, that means you understand your potential. That means you know the untapped skills and possibilities that lie within you. The cope means that you are able to overcome your challenges successfully. And then work means that you are working for a particular outcome, and that outcome is something that produces fruit. And then contribution, that means that you have somehow made an end product. And that's how we know that you're working well mentally and emotionally.
Okay. Bryant?
Well said. Um, Mental illness. You, I will use what you said a little bit earlier, Victoria, when you talked about saying things in the pulpit or saying things like I'm OCD, right?
Mm-hmm.
OCD, mental illness, things that we can find in the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual,
Mm.
right? An actual diagnosis, right? That's really what we're talking about when we're talking about mental illness. So that's why we say, like, you don't want to use just words like that just
Right.
carelessly, because
Right.
that mean those words mean something,
Right.
right? Those words are taken seriously because it's a diagnosis. We're diagnosing someone's mental illness. And to Dr. Pay's point earlier, um, talking about misdiagnosing, you it takes time to sometimes figure to understand these things because before we diagnose, we have to rule things out.
Mm.
That's right.
Sometimes people come into therapy or come in, and I'm not a psychiatrist, so I won't speak on that. For I'll let Dr. Shepard take that. But people come in and think like, all right, tell me what it is. Like we gotta rule some things out before we can just name it. Like you just walked in here.
Yeah.
We got have some questions to ask. And we also have to be careful how we assess those answers, because people come into our offices and they try to give us scripted responses oftentimes. Right? That's why I said I don't take for granted people's honesty in this process. They're trying to figure out what is it you want to hear. What is it? Why are you asking me that question? What is it you want me to say? And I'm slowing people down all the time. I'm not looking for an answer, but what you give me. I just want your truth. I don't want you to feel like there is a prescribed answer that I'm looking for. This is your space. Use it how you need to.
Thank you for all those responses. I have a question that came up while you were talking, John, Bryant, and that is, I don't know if I'm wrong, because this is before I want to ask the next question. I don't know if I've been wrong, should I say, or and this is mainly for church leadership or church pastors and chaplains and et cetera, et cetera. I particularly, because I think, Pei, you mentioned it earlier, or somebody mentioned you didn't see a lot of us, people of color or Black people, if I could just say, in this profession, in all these three areas of expertise. How important is it for us to go to us, even though there's not a lot of us in the field? How important? Because I used to subscribe to please go to a person of color, and I still do that, because there's been conversation. I think, Jonathan, you've been in one of them, how greatly people of European descent tend to always want to give, particularly our kids, or put us on medication. That's the first go-to. And I'm not saying that people of color don't do that, but how important, anybody can answer this. All three of you don't have to answer, but anybody who wants to, how important is that? Or is it important? I mean, I think it's important. So just tell me if I've been mistaken.
Yeah, I mean, it is important. We want to be with somebody who understands you. And what I have found out is that sometimes a person who is of a different ethnicity or a different color may even understand you better than somebody of the same race that you are, which is just the truth. But most times than not, it is going to be somebody who understands you. I work in Woodlawn. If anybody out there knows Woodlawn, Woodlawn is predominantly Black, West Side, Baltimore. If you go work at Woodlawn, you got to understand the community. And so people look at me and they see me dressed a certain way, and they say, "Oh, size me up." And when I get back to my office, I start talking plain to them. It's like they get confused. It's hilarious. And I tell them, I said, "Well, it's not because I'm from here. I'm from Chicago, and being from the West Side of Chicago, North Side of Chicago, where my church was right next door to Cabrini Green. Even though I grew up in a white suburb that was predominantly Jewish, I went to a Black church that was right next to the project, so I can really talk with whoever, and it makes a big difference. And the people will start to let their guard down. So, yes, it makes a difference, but it shouldn't be the only difference. You don't say, I'm not going to go to this person because they're not Black. We don't want that. You need the help is the priority. And then hopefully you're able to find somebody who looks like you, who understands you.
Okay, I'm gonna think about that. Don't say. I'm a work in progress, because what happened? They have to be. If they're not Black, they have to be a person of color. If they're not Black, they have to be a person of color or a woman. I'm just sorry. That's just the way I do it.
Yes.
And because I need someone to understand me and not understand me, because I've been in positions where, it wasn't in my therapy. I felt like I was giving them therapy, right? I felt like we needed to switch. Yeah. Because when you go in there telling people you a minister or pastor or anything, it just seemed like the dynamics just shift. And I'm like, well, who's supposed to be helping whom, right? So, yeah. And it's always happened with non-people of African descent. So that's why I want to name that. And so my next question then would be, did you want to say something, Pei?
Yeah, I wanted to say that what we're really looking for is cultural competency.
Yes.
And sometimes the assumption is that if they look like us, they have the same sensibilities or they have the same understanding. That's not necessarily true. Okay.
Cultural competency. Yeah.
Cultural competency. That being said, I have had lots of folks who their therapy has stalled, and part of the stall has been a disconnect with the person understanding who they are and
Mm,
what their context is.
That's right.
mm,
And the other place where there's a breakdown is that sometimes you go to a therapist who is not culturally competent. So maybe they don't understand issues of trauma, or issues of class, or issues of race, or issues of gender, or issues of being transgender, you know?
mhm.
And I'm not the expert of everything,
Right,
but
right.
then I don't pretend to be either.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah.
So I'm coming into this relationship with a lot of humility, and willing to allow people to define for themselves who they are and what their experience has been, without imposing my own experience.
Mm.
Yes, yes.
Because you look at me and you think, oh yeah, I'm talking to a black woman. Actually, yeah, I look like a black woman, but maybe my identity is something other than what you're judging me on. you know
Right.
and maybe the reason that we're not connecting isn't around race, it's around class,
That's right.
Mhm.
right? And maybe the reason that we're not connecting is because there might be some transference issues.
Hmm.
Say a little
you
more about
know
that.
well, transference would be the kinds of things that I look at you and make assumptions, because people come into our offices and we make assumptions. They make assumptions about us, but we make assumptions about them too.
That's true.
Mhm.
And being aware if there's something about them that is triggering me, or if there's something about them that is rubbing me the wrong way, or if I'm over identifying with them, or not identifying with them enough. I'm like, you are just such a crybaby. Like, you ain't been through nothing. Like, how you expect me to use my empathy for you? Like, I'm gonna save this empathy for somebody who really needs it, who's gone through something. But
Mm,
that it may not look big to me, but it's huge for the person going through it.
That's right.
And if they have not gone through as many challenges as I've gone through, I can't then prejudge them and not give a certain weight and a certain value to the challenges that they do have.
mm,
Okay? Because there's no hierarchy of pain where we
mm.
decide that this much pain requires, a certain level of empathy and a certain level of, and if I don't think that your pain is enough, then I'm going to ignore you. Or if I think your pain is too much, then I totally don't want to deal with you, and I'm putting up a wall between you and I. Therefore, I'm like, so yeah, you got run over by a truck. And you get no kind of empathy, because I'm like, I can't deal with somebody who's been run over by a truck.
Mm. Yeah, that's powerful. That's powerful what you just
Yeah, because
said.
it's a didactic relationship. There are lots of
Yes.
things happening in that context. And it's a really about being able to be aware of all of the things that are happening. Because the bottom line is that whether you're a medical doctor, or doing social therapy, whatever, or talk therapy or narrative therapy, it's still a relational relationship,
Right.
you know? And some relationships work and some don't.
Mhm.
Right. Absolutely. You're right about that. So listen, that is powerful. So I'm gonna give you all of y'all some questions so that we can move swiftly through our last few minutes. So listen to this carefully. The first question I want to give to what how does your faith or spirituality play an intricate role in therapy? I think that should be for everybody, but we can do 30 seconds or less. How does your faith or spirituality play a intricate role in therapy?
I'll jump in first.
I knew you would. I knew you would because I remember this being like something really primary
And
with you.
it's not because I don't like the dead air. I just wanted to, because that's a tool in therapy.
I know.
Um, I- when I was doing doctoral studies, again, it was intentionality around integrating psychology and theology. And we had to do a paper on what is your theological perspective, solely theological perspective. And I remember being annoyed by that paper when I was in school. But as I began to practice, I began to understand the value or the significance of it. And what does that mean for me? It means that as a person who is a therapist, I have a theological perspective on things. A little bit
Mhm.
about what Dr. Pei was talking about, that transfers and countertransference. I have a perspective. And what and if I'm not thoughtful about what that perspective is, it can take over a session with me unaware.
Mm.
It's important for me to know what my theological perspective is because it influences the way I provide treatment. I'll give you an example of that. If my theological perspective is I believe that humanity is inherently good,
Mhm.
then I treat people when I care for them as if they're inherently good,
Okay.
right? Versus you're a bad person and there's no hope for you, right? That's that's part of it, right? So understanding, I think one's own faith. There's a particular modality out called the person of the therapist. It suggests that the therapist come in the room too.
Mm.
That the therapist as a person shows up in the room, and that therapist doesn't disconnect themselves from the treatment that they provide. I
Mm.
very much believe in that. Like I said, we don't just talk about that, but we're gonna do it. We're in it. It's gonna be live and in living color, and for me, that is part of how my faith shows up because we ain't talk in church. We ain't talk about deliverance. We got folk delivered. We didn't just talk about. We was like, we're gonna get you delivered, right? Whatever that looked like in those some of those contexts, right?
Right.
So, and that's kind of how I think it shows up in therapy for me.
Good. Good. Thank you for that, Jonathan. How do you think that they play a role?
Oh, it plays a large role, and I have to be transparent. I used to try to hide that role, and I
Mm.
try to diminish it.
Mm.
And I'm glad that we've talking about it. And you said something earlier that really just confirmed and how I need to continue to play, allow it to play a larger role. But what I'm identifying now is here in Baltimore, because Baltimore is about half the size of Chicago. So a lot of people people know each other here.
Yeah.
And then especially if you're in psychiatry or mental health, and then you're in the church world, people gonna know who you are. And so people come in and so you can tell they can talk in that language, as Dr. Bryant was saying. And I just allow them to do it now. I used to shy away from it.
Mm.
When I started to open up the door now and let people talk about it, it makes a huge difference. And depending on where we go, I might even share with them a little bit about what I believe. I do that now because now I'm getting people from my church coming to see me.
Mm.
Um, and you'll never know who they are. I tell them, like, we in church, don't come up to me.
Yeah,
Right.
I'm
Right.
like, can
Right. Right. Right.
you check my Prozac dose? No, don't you do it. Folks will do it. Wait a minute, I'm just, it's interesting. So I even have to sit certain places at church because people will literally come and ask me to do things. It's just something. But
Yeah.
it plays a large role, just to answer your question, and I'm glad it does.
Okay.
they
That's
forget
okay.
they have to schedule an appointment.
Yeah,
Right. Right.
We don't. This is not walk up service.
right.
Right.
I think that like Jonathan and Dr. Jonathan and Dr. Brian, that my personal faith, what it does is that it shifts the way that I look at people, and and they don't have to believe what I believe, but I believe um, that they are um, that they're unique, they're created by God. So then what do you do when you have these unique beings of light who've done terrible, dark things, right? And what that helps me to do is it helps me to remember that the person sitting across from me is not what they've done.
Mm. Mm.
So that, I don't call it grace, but what it does is that, Carl Rogers, who talked about, unconditional positive regard, you know, he was a pastor. And it sounds like, everybody is, is good to be able to find that good, because sometimes I see good in people that they don't see in themselves.
Mm.
Right? Sometimes I see the ability to do that they don't see in themselves.
That's
So
right.
part of what I'm doing is hope therapy, right? It sounds very clinical when you put it in that context, but I think that, in terms of giving people something that they could look forward to or be able to see a different narrative than the one they're accustomed to. Because the narrative that you were married to is what got you in the place where you are, and you're stuck. So unless you can begin to see a different narrative, then you can't even begin to envision moving out of the space that you're in to another space that may be a healthier space. So
Mm.
I don't preach my religion to people, but I certainly use the principles that are life-giving to people. And some of those stuff I see is clearly, mental health or clearly clinical, but some of it is spiritual, you know. And I would use the words of Christ, the words of Buddha, the words of, whatever that gives them life, and use the context and the tools of their own faith to help them
Absolutely.
to go ahead and to heal.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And so I appreciate that. So my next question is going to get a little deeper, and I want to shoot this one to Dr. Jonathan. And that is, we talked about the integral role that spirituality plays with therapy. Now let's talk about how has religion or the church interrupted therapy. Woo! I know that's powerful. Come on, Dr. J. How has religion or the church interrupted therapy?
Oh, absolutely. They've interrupted. They've almost crushed it if they could have their way. Some of them, and I'll just say this: one of the things I've learned in my studies, working with my mentor, is how to be able to break it down real quickly. People need to understand that if you're going to be a believer, you need to have what I call the Trinity method, the Trinity
Mm.
approach, 3 in 1. You need to have a savior, all right, Jesus Christ. You need to have a pastor that will feed you. Please don't forget that, because many times we forget that person. I hear
Yes.
people, you need Jesus and a therapist. No, no, you don't. You need a pastor who
Mm.
will feed you with knowledge and wisdom, as the Bible says in Jeremiah. And then number 3, then you need a mental health professional. And so you said, well, how has religion interrupted? Because I know where I'm at. What's happened is religion has tried to make these 3 be at odds with each other, and it is a lie. All right. Savior is not at odds with the pastor, is not at odds with the mental health professional. Um, they, they understand their lane. The problem is that many times people blur over into lanes they're not supposed to be in. And
Mm.
so they start driving, and that's when you have accidents. When
Mm-hmm.
you cross over to my lane, that's when we have a head-on collision or side collision. And that's how it gets interrupted. If we understand the Trinity approach, as I call it, and know that each of them works in their lane in a way in which they could help people, that interruption wouldn't happen.
Brian, what do you have to say about that? Especially with your expertise to the transgendered and the LGBT communities, how has church interrupted or religion interrupted therapy?
One of the things that we talk about when we talk about doing theology,
Mm-hmm.
we talk about knowing the other side.
Mm.
Not that you have to agree with the other side, but you need to know the other side. You need to know what you're arguing, who you're arguing against, essentially, right? And not an argument in terms of being combative, but a different point of view.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I believe that as really to Dr. Shepard said, to Dr. Shepard's point, when people don't understand what's going on in the other lane,
Mm.
they can often speak ill of it. Um, and they'll speak about it in ways that are untrue sometimes.
Yeah.
And we as therapists, pastors, we all sit in seats of authority.
Mm-hmm.
And that authority can be abused if we're speaking about the other and we don't understand their point of view, or if we don't understand it, right? I've been in the seat of a pastor and I've been in the seat of a therapist, so I can speak about both well. But the pastor who has not been a therapist has to be careful about how they speak about therapists and therapy or psychiatric treatment.
That's right.
And if we're speaking about it in ill-informed ways, then it can be problematic in the care that people would need, because they're taking those positions, because people are sitting in positions where they're listening to those who are in the authority, and they're
Yes.
taking that stuff to heart,
Yeah.
and it
Yeah.
would direct them in unhealthy ways if it is not done with intentionality, if it's not done in an informed way.
So thank you for that response. I really appreciate it. So we only have a couple minutes left, and I really want to get this out. Should have scheduled more time for this because I have three powerful people on here. As it relates to church, and I'm not picking on church, but I think these are some, because I've been a pastor and pastoral counselor and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think, and I'm a life coach and, leadership coach. And I think sometimes we do step in lanes we should not be stepping in. And so as it relates to pay, as it relates, what is, for me, if someone, as a pastor, someone came to me about a particular situation that they were having, and I would guide them as much as I could as a pastor for 2 or 3 weeks. I like shut it down at the 3-week mark and refer them out. At what point should we be referring, we being pastors, church leaders, church counselors, be referring out to professionals as yourselves? Real quick.
If you don't have the time to meet with that person once a week or several times a week for an hour, because your calling requires that you do other stuff, then that would be a good thing to refer out. If you don't have the bandwidth, or if you don't have the training to be able to work and go in deep with the person. I think that one thing I wanted to say is that it is hard for people who want to be liked to be honest with their clergy, right? Because the clergy sort of stands in for God and all of the judgment. And we know that religion has done a lot of good, but it's done some harm too, And sometimes you can't get your healing from the same place where you got hurt, And sometimes you need to be able to allow. I've had the benefit of being with clergy that understood that my role was different than their role, and that they needed both, and that they needed all of us to be able to work together. And confidentiality was important, and being able to not have to impress me or speak in a way that doesn't offend, or in church speech that doesn't offend me, that all of those things are important. And nor would a pastor say, hey, you got a broken leg, let me come bandage that up for you. They wouldn't do that. They'd be like, oh, you have a broken leg, let me call 911 and get somebody to come bandage that for you. You got to know what you can do and what you can, because sometimes help is pointing them in the right direction.
Okay, great. Thank you for answering. I had to, we'll talk offline, something you said, but we don't have the time here. But anyway, Jonathan, can you name what is the difference between situational depression and manic depression? Because earlier, I've heard it throughout this whole conversation, the main thing people diagnose themselves with is, and when we all do it, I'm depressed, or I have situational depression, or I have manic depression, which we know is a form of bipolar. Can you just briefly tell us the difference between those, if you can?
Yeah. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to just do it according to a continuum. I speak about this often. So on my left, and however it's showing up on your screen, is what we call distress. Everyone has distress. If you are alive, well, human being, whatever, you're going to have distress. We all have distress. What happens is you will continue on in life on this journey, and different hits will happen, and you will get distressed. But if you stay distressed for too long, you will hit a destination called disorder. Everybody
Mm,
is not disordered, but everybody is distressed. And so the difference between distress and disorder is disorder means you're unable to function properly, inability to operate properly. And that's where, when you look at situational depression, many people are distressed, but they're not necessarily disorder. And it could become, again, situational depression could become major depressive disorder. It just depends. But what I'm hearing when I hear people say that, many of them are not major depressive disorder. Many of them are just distressed. The spouse just cursed them out on the way to church. They just had a fight with their kids. They just knocked each other around and blah this,
yeah.
this. And now the sermon's going, oh, I feel so bad. I'm situational depressed. And it's just, and I'm not making fun, but that's exactly what I hear a whole
Right.
lot of.
Right. Me too. Yeah.
That is not depression. Okay. And I tell people you don't want to be depressed because it hurts. Manic depression is a disorder. That is a true disorder. It's an old school term. It's bipolar disorder. But it's a manic depressive. And so a lot of folks don't realize that that's a real old school term. It's bipolar disorder. And most of our folks are not bipolar disorder. It's only a small percentage of people who are truly bipolar. So we want to make sure you get truly diagnosed. Just because you flip your script or you change your mind frequently don't mean that you're bipolar. I hate that, you know. So I'm gonna stop right there.
Okay. Thank you for that. And thank you for explaining the difference because I hear, these terms a lot and I wanted our viewers to see what these different terms mean. Brian, can you we talked about this before. And I like how you talk about how anxiety, because, I was diagnosed with anxiety some years ago, right before undergrad school. And I always got stressed with tests. But, you talked about how anxiety will lead you to a rabbit hole or something like that. Can you talk to us briefly about, in a few seconds, about anxiety?
Yes, and based upon our previous conversation, I'll be specific about what you're asking. Um, and this is one part of anxiety that I like to talk about because there is a healthy amount of anxiety that we can
Mm-hmm.
experience.
Mm-hmm.
But oftentimes, one of the things that anxiety does is moves us out of the present, which is what we know, and moves us into the future, which is what we don't know.
Mhm.
And the reason why it can have such a field day with us in the future is
Wow.
because there are endless possibilities in the future.
Right.
And so anxiety takes us from one thing to another thing to another. And what if this? And what if that? Oh, and that could happen. And it's just like it can be an endless cycle.
Okay.
And so sometimes the work of managing that is
Mm.
to get us out of the future and bring us back to the present. And so there are a different number of coping mechanisms that we'll employ in order to help individuals do that.
I love that. I love that. Thank you so much to
Mhm.
get us out of the future. Because I'm always I'm always thinking ahead. And I love you. You kind of saved me because I had to get back to the
You have to
present,
bring it
right?
back.
With
Mhm.
myself and align myself with the present. Because I'm so futuristic as a visionary. So, whoever wants to, can you uh, share with us, each of you, in your different expertise and your thought process and your mindset around your expertise? Tell us briefly how those who are dealing with mental awareness, I mean, any form of mental awareness, whether it be mental health or mental illness, mental wellness, how can we best serve ourselves amid diagnoses, right? How can we still live our better self or live our best life amid a diagnosis? And I don't care who goes first. Real briefly.
Diagnosis is not you. I'll say that.
That's good.
Uh, we have to be careful when we speak about illnesses, and I am guilty of this, especially when people say about cancer and other things. They literally almost take on the persona of the illness.
Hmm.
Um, I am depressed, or It's just we got to be very careful, and we talked about it already throughout the show of what we speak on ourselves, or speak about ourselves, or speak over ourselves. So, how do you do that? Number one, recognize you are not the illness. The illness is not you. That's very important. You are still the person that God created. There's an illness that may have attached itself to you for whatever reason, and let's get the help. And that's the second part. You can get help for the diagnosis. That help is available, and you just got to seek it out. And then not just seek it out, you got to walk out the steps of the treatment.
Mhm.
That's good. That's good. Seek it out and walk out the steps. Anybody else have anything to say around that?
Yeah, I'll jump in. A little bit about how that faith and religion impacts diagnoses, right? Because I used to hear, I've heard things in church like, "Oh, I'm not claiming that.
Right.
I'm not
Right.
claiming that mental."
Right.
You don't really have to claim it in order to have to experience, in order to be experiencing it. That's not what you have to do.
That's right.
And so, and but I get what that language means. That language means, and this is part of having a faith background yourself. Part of that language is that I'm um, I don't want that I believe that it's going to no longer be part of my life, so I can't speak it over my life in order if I want to be disassociated with it at some point.
Right. Right.
Again, that's kind of knowing your lane between pastor and clinician, how to communicate those type of things. And I really appreciate Dr. Shepard saying what he said, because that is one of the things that I say. We talk about in narrative therapy. We use the language of externalizing the problem, that I am not the problem, but the problem is what the problem is. And so part of how I help people adopt that type of language is by saying, I manage depression or I manage anxiety. You don't have to say that I have anxiety or that I have depression, but I do have to manage it.
That's right.
I have to be
Right.
thoughtful about the things that I do, the things that I say, my experiences, in order to make sure it stays contained, right? But I have to be honest about it before I can do that. And so if I'm not being truthful about my lived experience, about my symptoms, then I'm not going to be able to effectively manage it.
Exactly. And I'm glad you mentioned that. I see you, Pay. I'm glad you mentioned that, if we're not going to be honest and truthful. And there are still some churches, it amazes me in the 21st century, how we are still in prayer lines saying, come on out, depression. Come on, and then people are guilted or feel shame about, having to manage depression or any form of mental health or illness. And so I'm glad that you mentioned that, because it disassociates. It's like we put people in boxes, and then people. I've heard somebody say on the radio station, a church, not a radio station, on Facebook one Sunday, they were talking about God didn't give you depression, and God didn't, and so the ways in which they were framing it is that God didn't give it to you, and God is not responsible for it, and I'm like, okay.
Wow.
I would almost challenge that when Jesus was in the, Gethsemane in the garden. That was to me a form of depression. They may not get. Let me just stop here. But we diagnose people and we guilt people into not being able to not only get help, but even manage what they do have, and then they go into secrecy. And it amazes me we're still doing that right now in this time. Pay.
I just want to end with the fact that sometimes religion espouses magical thinking. Things are mysteriously, appear and disappear. And that, I believe that people are healed. And I believe that rehabilitation can be a form of healing also. I think that we have to be very careful in the way that we use language to not disempower or create a false narrative for people, a false sense of reality, because then we don't give them anything at all to fall back on. And some stuff it's not going to be one day of prayer and just lay hands on you, poof, you fall out and stuff. Some of the stuff is gonna, I think the scripture says, it's going to require prayer and fasting. But I think that from a clinical perspective, what it means is that some stuff is going to take a little time to work through.
Absolutely.
As they went,
Absolutely.
they were healed.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And also what we expect is outcomes, sometimes total 100% healing to them coming back to where they were before, that may not be the healing that they get. The healing that they get may be that they regroup and are
Yes.
able to manage their lives in in a different way, that's not the place where they were before, but have certainly been lifted from where they had been. That you could see some of the healing has happened.
That's an excellent point, Dr. Payee, because folks will come into treatment with the expectation of make that thing go away. And that's not our job. We can't do that.
But
That
that's
thing
a
will
learn.
never go
Don't you
away.
think
That's
that's a
part of
learned?
your journey,
Yeah. Don't you
right?
think that's a learned behavior, Bryant? Though that stems from um, certain faith groups. That
Well, I mean, when we talk about baptism, we talk about washing away your past, and that's one of the reasons why I think it's easier for folk to talk about their past in a faith community, and I see the past, not their present,
mm,
than it is in therapy, because there is this notion that, oh, all that stuff is under the blood, oh, we left
right.
that in the pool, right? And so
Yeah.
it implies that's no longer a part of me, but it is your journey,
It
But
is.
Well,
and
and
those
I
things
also
have
also
impacted they impact how you are today.
absolutely, and
Yes.
it's also part of the theology around sin and around illness. That
Hmm.
if the person is sick, if the person is going through something, that must be a result of some type of sin,
Right.
and that is not true.
It is not
You could
whatsoever.
just you could be depressed and it's not about sin. You could
Yeah.
be anxious and it's not about sin.
Yeah.
and I was just going to say, just from a scientific, I know I'm around here with all these theologians. This is scientifically, though, we expect for scientists, doctors, clinicians to heal us. That is what, when we go to the doctor, we expect for them to remove what the issue is before we
Hmm.
get to theology. When we go to the doctor, we expect to be the same or get us back to where we were before. And that just does not happen. I am working now. I can go to the theological. I work on a sermon on homeostasis. If y'all know what that word
Mm.
is, go look it up. It has just been blowing my mind because we
Yeah, I know what it is.
understand. Dr. Pay, when you said equilibrium, I clicked within me because that's the word I've been just chewing on. Because as we grow and as you evolve through therapy, you will not go back to where you were when you first came in, and you shouldn't
Mm.
want to. Shouldn't want,
No,
but people. I'm telling you, people expect for that to happen, and theologically, yes, but even scientifically,
Yes.
when you go to the surgeon, you expect for that person to take that thing out so you can be back to normal, back to where you used to be. How dare you? You can't.
it's like asking to go back to when you were 20.
Yeah.
Your
Yes.
body has
Yes.
aged 20, 30 years. You can't go back to 20. And sometimes we can't go back to where we were. We can only hope to be the best 50 or the best 60 that we could be.
Now you preach it to the choir right here because I actually lived that. I mean, both of you are saying, all three of you are saying something powerful. Because if I could just tell a quick story, and that is that, after the second cancer, my girlfriend had to say, Vic, I won't use all the words she used, but Vic, your behind is not the same. Stop expecting your healing to be the same, right?
Mm,
You don't have the capacity and you're differently abled now. Get
wow.
over it, right? And when
Woo.
she said that, I was offended at first, but I had to think about that thing and process it. She is right. I'm almost 60 and I'm differently able, having to have cancer the second time and giving me neuropathy in my hands and my feet. And I can't move or brain fog. I can't function like I used to, right? Why would I want to even try?
Mm,
So I am trying to discover a new me and how to process through that.
wow.
And that's what I have been learning. And it's been a hard thing because, my, wanting to control all that and how I used to process, have the capacity to do everything and be superwoman. No, I am not. And I'm not trying to be. Actually, it's a better place that I've ever been in my entire life. It is a better place that I've ever been in my entire life. Not trying to get healed back to the way I was. Woo! Y'all said something powerful there. Listen, it is almost time to stop this show. It is time. We way past time, but I just want to ask all of you, what is your superpower? Just give me one word, because I got this from Kendall Brown a long time ago. I've been using it ever since. What is your superpower? Not just as therapist, personally or professionally. What is your superpower? Pay.
Oh, it's my ability to separate. And I didn't know this. My sister told me earlier today. She said it's your ability to separate the stuff that is elemental from the stuff that is fluff. That ability to be able to zone in on what's important and what's valuable.
Yeah, you are good at that. The times I've been around you, you are really, really good at that. Really good. Your sister's right. Jonathan.
2, discerner, giver.
Discerner and giver. I love that. Bryant.
My compassion.
Compassion. That is wonderful. Well, listen, should therapists have therapists? I know all of y'all going to say the same thing. Should a therapist have a therapist?
Yes.
Yes.
Why?
Does a dentist have to get their teeth cleaned?
Ooh! I love that. I love that. I love that. Right.
Even a master piano needs to be tuned.
Ooh, I like
y'all stroking it tonight. I'm loving all of this. You're getting credit one time. That's a preacher thing. But listen, I appreciate you all being present. Please stay on and even after we get off. But thank you for being present. Thank you for your expertise. Thank you for your willingness and your kindness to want to do this and give people tools from this conversation, because it definitely will give people tools to put in their hands and really process the ways in which it'll give leaders tools. It'll give viewers who don't consider themselves leaders. I think everybody's a leader, but it give people tools. And I thank you for putting the tools in our hand. I thank you for being present. What last thing or comment do you want to say to the people? We'll start with you, Bryant. Whatever you want to leave them with.
I think I will take the slogan that has been a common slogan during COVID. It's okay to not be okay.
That's good. I love that. It's okay to not be okay. It's okay not to be okay. Listen, y'all, I'm just saying, y'all talking to me tonight. Jonathan?
I'll just put in my contact information. If you need a direct care services, I do provide direct care services. Hope Health Systems. It's a poor frog that won't praise his own pond. So if you're in need of direct care services, come on out and you can hit me up on my website. And again, I would just go back to that word homeostasis. Just know that wherever you might find yourself in life, just get back to that place of equilibrium. Equal does not mean the same. You want to make sure that you are at a good place. And I love what you said, Dr. Bursa, about how you're going through your cancer journey. We've all gone through our journey in 2020, 2021, 2022 through COVID-19 pandemic. And one thing that I said, I'm ending right here, is I will not be the same when I come out of this pandemic as when I went into it. And It definitely has been the case.
Yes. Pay.
Self-care is spiritual.
That's what you want to land with. Self-care is spiritual?
Self-care is spiritual.
I love it. And self-care sometimes means letting go some stuff, y'all. Self-care means letting go. Listen, I just want to go ahead and tell our viewers who's going to be here 2 weeks from now. Can we get my producer to show us that? Yes. Our next guest will be Dr. Virdra Jackson. Yes, hailing from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. She will be coming forward, joining us for a rich conversation around, she has her own company called Living Strong, but around trauma. She will be dealing with trauma, a lot of trauma, and learn how to cultivate and ignite a better version of yourself after experiencing or enduring various forms of distress. Again, we're still in Mental Awareness Month, and come and join us 2 weeks. We're back to our schedule, regularly scheduled time, Sunday at 7:30, 2 weeks from now on the 22nd. Our last finale, our last show will be yours truly in June, coming to you you'll learn next 2 weeks. All right. Thank you. God bless you. Thank you, guests. I really love you. Mwah.